Thank you to today's show sponsor, Azalea Orthopedics. They are a group of highly trained physicians and surgeons in East Texas that will meet all of your orthopedic needs. To learn more about Azalea Orthopedics, go to azaleaortho.com. That is azaleaortho.com. Welcome to Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace. I am Dr. Grace English, founder of Deep in the Heart Ministries. We are a ministry that exists to tackle the hard realities of this life through the power of Jesus Christ. He is the only one that can set us free from our addictions, our negative thoughts and emotions, and bring us the true lasting healing and peace that He wants for our lives. Welcome to Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's topic is entitled Wrestling with Unmet Expectations. All of us feel like we are in control of our lives, but we really aren't in control. The longer I live, the more I realize I am not in control of my life. And today, my special guest is Mandy Jentes, and she has wrestled with the Lord over several unmet expectations in her life, including infertility, hopes of adoption, and what she had in mind for her family. And so Mandy, she was born and raised in Tyler, and she moved away as a young adult to Southern California, went to college there, but she came back to Texas, and she's been married to her husband, Dean, for the last 13 years. She has been working at the Genesis Group, which is a global software company. And she, interestingly enough, her father, Phil Burks, had actually founded the group many years ago. But on the side, Mandy, she is very much putting so many hours in as the Families Count area coordinator for the East Texas region. And today we're going to be talking more about that. And so I just want to welcome Mandy to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Grace.
You are welcome. So Mandy, why don't you start off just telling us a little bit about your childhood?
Well, my parents, they met at LeTourneau University, and they married while they were still in college. They had my sister and I, and they ultimately divorced when I was about 4 years old. Shortly after that, my dad remarried. My mom moved to California to be closer with family. When I was about 22, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I feel like that was a big aha for a lot of us. That explained a lot. I think that helped us understand some of the breakdown of the marriage and different things. But, yeah.
But you grew up in Texas.
I did. I was raised in Texas until I was 4 or 5. We actually moved back and forth between Texas and California a few times over the years.
Okay. But you wanted to be close to your mom and be able to take care of her and check in on her and all that.
Absolutely. We had great family roots on my mom's side in California.
Right. Well, I know your father. I mean, he loves the Lord. He's a man of God, and, he's been at our home church, Green Acres Baptist Church, ever since John and I joined in 1997. So he's been there a long time. So I'm assuming that you grew up in the church and became a believer at a young age.
Yes, I gave my life to the Lord in 6th grade at summer church camp, and definitely raised in church, whether I was visiting with my dad or with my mom. Very strong Christian roots in our family. I attended a Christian university, so it has been very much in the fabric of my life.
Right. And so your sister, how many years younger is she?
She's actually older.
Okay.
She's about 21 months older. So we were 1 grade apart, but almost 2 years apart.
Right. But your parents divorced. Y'all were actually fairly, you did okay with that transition. You understood that there were things going on in, your parents' marriage. And so you don't have a lot of, unresolved anger or bitterness or anything toward that.
No, I think all things considered, that's a very key statement there, but all things considered, given our circumstances, it was good. I have a wonderful relationship with my stepmom, Bobby Burks, of 40 years, and both of my parents had a very, very high priority to always speak highly of each other. So there was never that toxic things that a lot of times the kids get drug into. We were never drug into that.
Oh, y'all were very fortunate, and Bobby, she's a woman of God. So I'm glad that you two are very close,
Yeah,
and
she's
so,
amazing.
yeah. So tell us how you met Dean and how you got back to Texas.
So when I was about 30, I was living in Southern California from my college years until I was approaching 30 years old. And every time I would come out to visit my dad and family out here, they'd say, "Are you going to stay this time?" And approaching my 30th birthday, I realized living in Southern California is just hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I decided to move back to East Texas. And I did what a lot of people do in the early 2000s. I jumped on eHarmony and I met Dean online.
Oh, okay.
And after our second date, we had both unknowingly, after our third date, we had both unknowingly told both of our families, yeah, we're going to be married this year. And we were. We were married within 7 months of meeting each other.
Wow. And is he from East Texas?
He is. He was born and raised in Kilgore.
Oh, wow. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. So y'all ended up getting married and settling here in Tyler. And so tell us what your dreams were like when you first got married. Like, what did you want your family to look like?
Well, when we first got married, I would say luckily for me, at that point, we had already covered some really hard topics and critical topics. We did the Nearly Newlywed seminar at the church, did great premarital counseling. We did premarital counseling before we were even engaged because we knew the direction we were headed. And that allowed us to sort through some hard conversations. One of them being on our second date, Dean nobly and humbly said, "Hey, you deserve to know that there's a strong likelihood that I can't have kids." And he said, "I don't want to make you uncomfortable with thinking I'm speaking about things too seriously so early on." But he said, "I know that that's very important for a lot of women. So if that's a deal breaker for you, I don't want you to feel like I've wasted your time or I've hidden that from you." He said, "I don't want to be deceptive." And there was a session that Debbie Stewart did recently at Cultivate, and it really stuck with me. And she did a deep dive in Ezra. And what really stuck out to me is in Ezra 1:1, it talks about how the Lord stirred the heart of King Cyrus many years before it was time for him to take action. And when Dean told me that he likely couldn't have kids, in that very moment, like in real time, my mind was processing like, man, since a young girl, I've had a passion for adoption. And I didn't know what God was going to do with that. It kind of sat in the back of my mind, and I didn't know what that purpose was. But from a very young age, God stirred my heart. And when Dean told me that, I said, "Well, are you open to adoption?" He said, "Yes." And I went, there we go.
Great. So honestly, I mean, when he shared that news with you, you weren't, like in despair because the Lord already had spoken to you that adoption would be in your future, that was something you were so open to,
Yeah.
And so, and I admire your husband for being bold and being able to say that, and share that with you, such a tender thing before y'all were even engaged,
And I have his complete permission to talk about it. I think there's a stigma there, but studies show that 50% of infertility issues rest on the male side. But I think because there's a stigma there, we don't think that.
Right.
And I appreciate that my husband is comfortable enough to say it's as normal for me as it is for a woman, and it is what it is.
Right. And so you can't change it. And, it's also, I was surprised to find out that the infertility rate for males was that high. And so, because typically you just think it's the women, And so after y'all had that conversation, and so y'all just did y'all start looking into the adoption actively, or how did that come about? Or did you, I think there was something you told me you shared, like you still had a glimmer that maybe you could still have your own biological children.
Yeah.
So tell us about what had happened through that.
Sure. So at that point, Dean had reason to believe, but he had not had any confirmation with a specialist or anything. So some couples may be aware of this, but in order to see a specialist, you have to try naturally for the first year in order to go see a specialist. And in that window, even back when Dean had revealed that to me when we were dating, I don't think I faced the full weight of it yet because there was still that hope of we may still have biological children. Maybe we'll adopt as well. But I was able to stay, dare I say, a little bit in denial. But we tried for a year and we saw a specialist. And I'll never forget the drive to Dallas for that appointment because both of us said to each other and in our prayers, we just said, God, I don't think we can live in a gray area.
Mm-hmm.
There are many couples that do. And I just ache for how hard that is, year after year after year, not knowing and trying. But I said, God, at least have mercy on me to not give me a gray area.
Mm-hmm.
So when we saw that specialist, and he said definitively, very guarded, he said definitively, there is no chance that you'll be able to have children this way.
Right.
And Dean and I both smiled in that appointment, and it caught that doctor off guard. And we said, no, that's what we prayed for, a clear answer.
Okay, good. So y'all were able to take that news, embrace it, and just realize that that was the Lord's answer for y'all.
Yep.
And so after, did y'all begin seeking to foster, to adopt, and, did that, after that meeting you had in Dallas and you came back, how much longer was it until y'all started actually fostering kids?
I think a common thing that happens with marriages is the husband and wife's timelines are not always the same. So I was ready. And keeping in mind, we got married when I was 32 and he was 36. So whether we adopted or had children naturally, I'm like, we're not getting any younger.
Right.
So I was eager to move forward. He was okay to just take our time and look into it. But even then, I think that I was at risk of forming my own expectations of what I wanted to see. Like, okay, God, I'm being flexible with your will, flexible with your plan, but now I want X, Y, Z, and that's how I want it to play out. So I would go to seminars and I would go to different adoption conferences and just gather information.
Right.
But even then, looking back, I've read a book by Henry Blackaby called Experiencing God. And looking back, this really sits with me. And he says, frequently, the reason God's people miss his activity is they are not committed to joining him. They want God to bless their plans, not adjust to his will. Don't keep asking God to bless your plans and goals. Rather, look for God's invitation to join him in accomplishing his work. And even then, when I was yielding to the idea of adoption, I was still asking God to join me in my plans.
Right.
And I could see that looking back.
Right. So how long would you say you stayed in that mindset? And did you finally realize, wow, Lord, I'm still trying to take control. I am going to let go of the situation and allow you do whatever it is you want, So was that like a series of months or years, or did it happen overnight?
Yeah. And strangely enough, one thing that I've always rested in and I've found, dare I say, peace in, is I've seen biblically where God's timeline is rarely weeks, months, or years. A lot of times he works in generational cycles. So I know, and I even knew then, for God to work this out, it was going to take some time. So we married in 2012. We didn't start even fostering until 2018. So 6 years passed even for us to begin fostering. And fostering was an adjustment as well.
Yes.
Because when we first came on board with the idea of adoption, I think like many people wanted the idea of just that clean, simple, private adoption. I want a baby. I want them to grow up with me. And as we learned more and more about the need for fostering, that there are kids right in our backyard, it was another yielding my expectations to God's. And it was a slow chipping away of expectations where, okay, I'll adjust again and I'll foster. But we didn't even start fostering till 2018, so 6 years.
Wow. So you did have to get into his camp because 6 years would have been a long time for you to keep fighting back and forth, with this and trying to make things happen. And but he gave you the peace, Mandy, to wait till then. And both you and Dean were both on board and ready to foster when the Lord did bring y'all's, first foster children.
Yes.
And so, and I don't think I know this, but how many kids have y'all fostered?
That's always a funny question, and a lot of people do ask us that. I would say it's a little bit of a gray area because some of the children that we fostered, And that's even a pivot into another adjustment of our expectations, because we had laid out our plans. When you do foster, you actually tell the agency what ages you want to foster, how many kids you want to foster. And we said sibling groups and between the ages of 4 and 10. Our joke was they're out of diapers and they can get their own juice, but they're still young enough to think we're cool. And we started with that. But later, and we may discuss this more, but later, for example, we fostered a 16-year-old who was a parenting teen. So we had babies in the home, but they weren't technically our foster children.
Okay.
And it's grown from there. We've also had some kids join our home that aged out of foster care but needed somewhere to stay. So we've had a lot of gray area with people that have come through our home.
Oh my gosh, Mandy. I mean, it takes a special person to allow all of those kids who come in with, backgrounds that are just, dysfunctional, and they and you invite them into your home and you just love and care for them. That is definitely a calling. I think so.
We didn't always get it right, but
right.
I mean, we'd always say we're doing our best, but that doesn't mean it's always the right way.
Right. So when y'all did start fostering, you had mentioned that you felt like your plan was to go ahead and, have a baby, foster it, eventually get to adopt it, and would be your own. But that did not even come true.
Right. Yeah. As we fostered, I feel like a lot of times God will kind of warm us up to his plan and his journey, because we oftentimes, I think if God revealed his full plan to each one of us right up front, we'd all say, I'm out.
Right.
Like, I can't handle that. So he eased us into it. He took us from biological children to the idea of adoption, from adoption to the idea of fostering to adopt. And while we fostered, getting to know those kids more and more, we learned, man, they just want to go home. Like if there was any gift we could give them, is that their parents would heal, their family life would be restored, and they could go home. And that helped us. It helped break us more for the story behind it. It wasn't about us anymore. It was about the children. And if we were dead set on adoption, we could have taken a laser focus on that. There's plenty of children out there that are eligible and looking and seeking for adoption, and beautiful ministries for that. We kept seeing where God was placing children in our path, and it was our job to say yes to those children. And those children weren't eligible for adoption.
Right. So, yeah, that is kind of funny how the Lord, he moves you baby step by baby step.
Yep.
And he allows your eyes to see this other need that you'd never seen before. And so when you did have these other children in your home and you did see their hearts just wanting to be back with their families. And so that's kind of the start of when the Lord started instilling in you, like, this is something what the Lord wants. He wants to have restoration for these families. And so, yeah, I bet that was hard, but at the same time, he was directing you.
Yeah. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it to act like it was easy and a clean path the whole way. There's definitely some wrestling that happened throughout that time. But I do believe that God reveals his plan to us incrementally as we are prepared for it, or at least within our threshold of being uncomfortable. Lets us adjust to that and says, okay, let's turn the heat up a little bit more. And there were some things that we faced where I'm like, God, I just don't think I can do this. And it was again years later when I read Experiencing God where so many light bulbs came on. And another passage in it that Henry Blackaby said, when we announce what we can't do in response to God's calling, we're actually saying more about our faith in God than about our own abilities. Either we believe God is all powerful or we don't. And I think about like when God called Moses to lead the people of Israel. Moses gave excuses and he said, I have a stutter, I can't do this. And we're often saying like, no, I'm not the right person, I can't handle it. And a lot of times it's a clearer vision of us saying, God, I don't think you're powerful enough to do that through me.
Right.
And it does take time and a yielding of saying, I trust that if this is your plan, that somehow you're going to equip me with the bravery and the strength to do this.
Right. You also had Dean that also was, he was seeking the Lord, and you were able to discuss with him the things that you felt like the Lord was telling you. And then, because obviously this is it's you, both of you, who need to be on the same page when you're facing these decisions and stuff. And so thankfully you have a husband who is a believer, who was seeking God's face, in all of this. And so
unwavering support.
Yeah.
One theme throughout this is he knew and was sensitive to the fact that parenting was likely more important to me than it was to him from an early age. When he believed that it was not possible for him to have children, he kind of buried that expectation of having kids and being a father. So he was having to kind of rebirth this idea of being a father.
Right.
Whereas I had grown up with this hope of being a mother. But he had this unwavering support and always yielding and watching. And
okay, good.
We had this great harmony of watching each other. And there were times when I would really, really struggle. And I'm an internal processor, and he could respect my need for just space to work through it, but always coming back together.
Right. Did y'all seek counseling during this time, or?
We did more individually. We did do some marital counseling over the years. I think it's critical to do marital counseling before you hit a point of, distinct need. If you seek it out as maintenance more than repair work, it does help avoid catastrophic issues. But I was doing a lot of private counseling at that time too, laying a foundation, helping process all of this.
Okay. Well, that's huge.
Yeah.
Because you just need somebody else that you can verbalize what you're thinking and help you make sense.
Yep.
And, tease out the things that don't need to be in it, the lies, and then focusing on the truth. And so it always gives clarity.
It's so easy to have that pity party. And that was the easiest temptation. That was the easiest place to go. And so I valued having a strong counselor who, it was a safe place for me to say, okay, why me? Like today in this hour, I just need to say, why me? Why can't I have these families that I see everybody else have? I could have that pity party, and then we'd process and say, okay, time to, pull up my bootstraps again and get out there again.
Right. And so I know Dean was definitely a hands-on foster dad, and he did not leave the responsibility up to you. And so the children that y'all were able to have the privilege to foster through the years had both of y'all.
Absolutely. And we had teen boys, and that was one of those other progressions over the years where we had said we want young kids, and time after time after time, God was placing older teens on our path. And that was another incremental, adjusting of expectations. But the beautiful thing with that is we had a lot of teen boys come through our house. And I have just photos over the years of Dean working on cars with them. He would show them how to change the oil. He'd show them how to change a tire and do those fundamental things that a lot of those young men do not get. They don't have that male influence in their life.
Wow. Can I ask how long was the average stay for each child? It probably varied, but was it several months to several years?
Yeah, it did vary. We always let our agency know that short stays were harder for us since we both work full time. Okay. And that's a little bit of a rabbit trail, but when you have a short stay, there's a lot of appointments that have to happen right up front. And then it can settle into a little bit more autopilot. So we said we need placements and we need kids coming in our lives that are going to stay a minute. We've had placements that were anywhere from 4 months was probably our shortest, and those children return home to a grandparent. I joke that we have some kids that still haven't left and they're in their 20s. They don't live with us, but they're still regular fixtures of our life. But they would be with us a couple years before they turned 18.
Oh, wow. Wow. So you did have them for quite some time. And so
long enough to build roots.
Right. So when you realized that maybe this adoption thing was not working out the way you thought it was going to work out, how did the Lord move you to that place of just saying, I'm okay. I don't need to officially adopt, But like you had just mentioned, you have lots of children that you foster who are still very much a part of your life. And I know that there is a very special sibling group that the Lord has placed in your family, in you and Dean's family.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, and jumping back briefly, as far as the journey to being okay with the idea of not adopting it, it didn't happen easily. That I would say was the biggest season of wrestling in my entire life. And speaking of this sibling group, that is where sometimes I can look back and almost laugh with joy, where I can see God did have a plan in place, because we said, we want sibling groups because we have all these bedrooms. And he placed a solo teenage boy in our life. And we thought, well, we were really waiting for siblings. The joke was on us because he's one of 12. And although all 12 siblings didn't stay with us, we have done a great deal of life with many of those siblings. I mean, we have Christmas pictures with many of them in our house with matching pajamas. We do Polar Express with them at Christmas. And so there really is no end to the family with them. But when the last of that sibling group, when she turned 18 and moved out, I remember it. It's etched in my mind because it was such a pivot point for me. Dean and I were driving to church, and that was our first time being empty nesters in about 6 or 7 years. And we're driving to church, and Dean said, well, I guess that's the end of the road for parenting for us, since we didn't have any kids in the home. In his mind, he was thinking, we'll just let our license time out and we're just kind of done. Like that's the end of that chapter. And I remember looking at him and saying, well, the earth just cracked open when you told me that. I need to process that because I don't think we're on the same page.
Right.
And that was the beginning of grief, I think, for me. Because up till that point, I knew it was under the surface, but I was able to stay in denial of it and be on board. But that was my first time where I had to say, okay, what could this actually be the end of parenting for us?
Right. So that definitely stopped you in your tracks.
It did.
And I'm sure you had a lot of tears and a lot of crying with the Lord and asking, all the different emotions that you were going through. And husbands have a way of just saying things very plainly sometimes. You're like, could you have just said that a little bit nicer?
Yeah, it can be good and bad because sometimes we need to hear it plainly to face it. But a little bit of gentleness with some of those things could help.
Yes. So you did do some hard wrestling with the Lord on that, just to realize, okay, my parenting days were over. But really, I mean, Mandy, honestly, I don't think your parenting days are over. And so
that was the transition I had to go through in grief. I truly, with my counselor who I was already established with, she said, okay, let's roll up our sleeves. You're finally ready to do grief therapy. She said, at some point you need to grieve the loss of those expectations. And that was a powerful, hard season. Just like a two-year season of really processing that.
Right.
And I think up until then, I was wrestling with it under the surface, but I was trying to keep that face on of God is good. He has a plan. He keeps inching me farther and farther away from what I wanted.
Right.
But he has a plan. He is faithful. I wasn't giving myself permission to be real with my despair and to come to the foot of the cross with that. And a big pivot point for me during that grief season was, and I don't know if it's uncouth to give a shout out to another podcast, but Jenny Allen, she had a podcast episode and she had a guest on there. It's aired in October of 2023. And the guest was Dr. Alicia Cole. But that episode was about traveling through the night of your spiritual walk. And in many ways, I was in the night of my spiritual walk because I had so much anger towards God, so much despair, so much confusion, but I was in denial of those feelings. I felt like that's not the Christian thing for me to be angry at God. Like I'm supposed to be at peace with it. But in that episode, there was just these moments where they said, you can go to God and admit you are angry, you are confused. It is better to go to him with your despair than to shut him out. And it was like in that moment, it truly was a fork in the road for me where I could be so authentic.
Right.
And that did bring me actually more intimacy in my spiritual walk when I was able to be transparent with, he knew.
Right.
God already knew.
Right.
He was just sitting there waiting for me to be open with him. It's kind of like a parent with a teenager. You know the teenager's angry at you, and you know you're both in this little bit of a standoff. But once that teen comes to you and says, Mom, I'm really angry about this decision you made. Can we please talk it through? And you say, yes.
Yes.
And that is God. He's saying, I'm right here. I want to wrestle through this with you, but I can't if you shut me out.
Right.
So it ushered in this season of intimacy, which was painful and hard, but it was the beginning of growth and healing.
Well, I mean, what you just shared obviously hits the nail on the spot about getting real to heal, that the Lord's not going to be able to help you with what you are carrying until you are real with yourself and real with Him and be able to verbalize and make note of the things that you are feeling, you know, and letting it come up to the surface. A lot of people are scared because they don't know how they're going to handle all of this, but you just be amazed that there's so much lifting of the burdens and there's closure and the Lord can really speak to you in that intimacy and you really can feel His presence. And He is like, you know, just comforting you, like, okay, Mandy, it's okay. I know how you feel, and I'm going to walk you through this.
And trusting, like He's done for all the years leading up to that, I'm going to take you one step at a time as you're able. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I'm going to have to get uncomfortable, but He keeps me within the threshold of what I can handle when I lean on Him. You know, the classic, I can do all things through Christ. Well, people say, oh, I can do all things. No, through Christ, I can do it when I rest myself completely in His hands.
Yes.
And it wasn't pretty in that season. I was very raw. I mean, everything was just palpable. I was easily triggered with things, whereas I felt more ironclad in previous years. But I had to go through that to get to the other side. And I mean, as you know, God had a lot more planned for me and He needed me for a lot more. I would not have had the spiritual, emotional, mental capacity unless I worked through that healing.
So how did Families Count come into your life? Because He obviously is orchestrating so many different avenues to bring you to the place of where you are today.
Yeah.
And so after, you know, you did have your wrestling with the Lord and you did come out two years later. Is that when you started getting involved with Families Count, or was that something?
Interestingly enough, no. God folded in Families Count while we were still fostering. And it was introduced to me about 2020. And I always joke, there's a dear friend of mine, I'll call her out. Her name's Christy Sowell, and she works for the Fostering Collective. She sent me a video one time, and it was a video about this ministry called Families Count. It's a ministry that serves the biological parents that are behind these CPS cases. And they're often considered the villain. They're often considered the bad guy. And yet what we see time and time again, those parents have oftentimes been victims of their own trauma in their childhood.
Right.
They may not be parenting well because they weren't parented well and nobody's shown them how to do it better. So this ministry comes alongside those parents with no judgment, just unconditional love, and we shepherd them. We give them a court-approved parenting class, so it works them towards reunification. And I was introduced to that back in 2020, and we fostered for years after that.
Okay.
But it wasn't until a few years in where I realized, okay, I think this is actually the meat of what God has called me to do.
Right, right. So when did you step in as the area coordinator then? Has it been like a year or two?
I would say we're in about our fourth year.
Oh,
it's
okay.
still one of those like slow brews. It started by, we brought the ministry to Green Acres. It is a nationwide program. I would give a comparison to like a Celebrate Recovery, where it is modeled in multiple churches around the country. And this is a nationwide program. We brought it to Green Acres.
Wonderful.
We had a couple other churches say, oh, I'm interested in that. Let me do that. And when they did, I naturally stepped in to kind of shepherd them and say, here's what I did. Let me walk you through it. And that naturally, organically pulled me into a role of shepherding all the area churches that do it.
Yes. So it's not a small job.
No. No, when we're in the thick of hosting classes, I would say it's another 20 to 30 hours a week that I do on top of my full-time job. But it doesn't feel like work.
Right, because this is what the Lord has. He's burning this desire in you. This is like where you shine. Like this is your passion.
Yeah.
So it's not work. And the Lord is using you in such a mighty way for that, Mandy.
Yeah.
You know.
And it was through that ministry that I would say, even during this time, I was still working through my grief and working through my healing. And I'll never forget, it was at the fall friendship dinner at our church a couple years ago. We had hosted a table and we had alumni moms who had taken our class, our Families Count class. They came to that dinner, and a dear mutual friend of ours, Sherry McCoy, she was sitting at my table with me, and she saw me kind of ministering to, honestly, just having friendship with these moms.
Yeah.
And at one point she leaned over and looked at me and she said, do you not realize this is what you were created for? And in that moment, it didn't really struck me. I was like, yeah, okay, we're going to keep going. But it was the following night, I finally had this calm, quiet moment. And this is another one of those fork in the roads in my journey where I was just sitting there, resting in the quiet. And it's as if I could hear God say aloud to me, don't you realize if I had given you the family you wanted, if I'd given you all these desires that you asked for, you'd have been too distracted, too busy to ever look up and see what I had truly created you for. And it was this awe-inspiring moment that, I mean, to this day, it makes me emotional because it was this comprehension of, it was a level of sacrifice that he called me into that is hard and heavy. And yet it was this awe-inspiring realization that he chose me for something that he wouldn't choose many people for. He's like, I'm not going to call you into this level of sacrifice unless I have something absolutely incredible planned to come out of it.
Right.
And it was in that moment that I actually felt appreciative. I felt grateful for the losses in my life, grateful for those sacrifices of my desires, because I realized he wouldn't call just anyone.
Right.
It was humbling.
Right.
I call it my Ebenezer moment, where that was like the fork in the ground or the flag in the ground where I said, okay, I understand. It was a light switch moment where peace ushered in. And not many people get that. I consider that a great gift of mercy of God in my life, where he said, okay, we're moving forward.
Right.
And it was a line in the sand, and I have never looked back.
Wow. That's amazing, Mandy. I remember Sherry McCoy talking about you for several years before I actually even met you. You have to meet Mandy. You got to hear her testimony. And Sherry had introduced me to Families Count several years ago because, you know, her and Tony, they were very involved with CARE, the abortion recovery ministry that I was involved in many years ago. And, you know, they just have great hearts, and, you know, they see the need, you know, these families who are just broken, who just need some shepherding and some wisdom and some counsel and some prayer and people to walk along with them and tell them that they can do it.
Yep. Sherry and Tony are the epitome of people who understand there's so much power in coming alongside someone who's broken and struggling and say, I believe in you.
Right.
I believe you can do this, and I'm here to encourage you and support you. I mean,
know.
they have written the blueprint on how to do that with people.
I know. I'm telling you. I wish you could duplicate them many times.
Agreed.
You know, and so really you're at this place where you have been able to minister to many, many different families, and you know, the curriculum that y'all teach, it's Bible-based. It's all based on what the Lord's heart is, and is teaching these young couples, you know, who Jesus is and how do you become, you know, a Jesus follower.
Yep.
And then the children, you know, that I don't know if you get to meet the children of these families.
Many times.
Okay.
And it really it varies based on the relationship we build with the parents or what the state is of their case, how far progressed they are. But I mean, we could sit here for hours and talk about just the compelling experiences of meeting some of these children. And that's, again, another just, it's a picture of God's provision where it all depends on how I look at it. And my counselor, she would always say, Mandy, do you not understand the gift that you have? She said, the type of parenting you get to do is unlike what any other parents get to do. And stepping back a little bit, and it does tie into Families Count, I would always do the but. She'd say, oh, this is so beautiful because our kids would age out of foster care. They could go on and do their own lives, and yet they keep coming back. I mean, our boy Miguel, we consider him a son. He comes to our house every Sunday and just hangs out. And all of our bonus kids, they choose us. And my counselor said, there's so many biological families out there, parents and biological children, where the children aren't choosing their parents.
Right.
It is this relationship out of obligation and expectation. But she said, you have this beautiful relationship where there's this mutual choosing of each other, and there's no strings attached, and it builds each other's worth. Because we know neither one of us are required to be here. And through that, it was God's picture of showing, like, I have a plan for family for you, unlike what you've seen. I'm going to create a new blueprint for your family. And with Families Count, I don't know, it may be not the right comparison, but I go back to the story of Sarah and Abraham, how, they just grieved not having children. And God said, you're going to have more children than there are stars in the sky if you just trust my plan. And I look at this, and it is humbling when I have parents come to me and say, my kids returned home. You were a part of that. You played a role in my family restoring. I get pictures of kids graduating kindergarten. I get pictures of kids graduating high school. I get to go sit in the homes with these families and have dinner with them and their kids.
Right.
I get to do all these things because their family becomes my family.
Right.
And it is just this unique, different version of family where there is no edge. There is no boundary to what my family is anymore.
Right. And that grief that you used to carry is no longer there.
Right.
And the Lord has surpassed those needs that you had, and He's multiplied the blessings.
Yes.
1,000-fold.
And instead of me wrestling with the buts, and looking at comparison is the thief of joy. And I would compare and look at all these other families, and having that pivot point in my journey of healing, instead of seeing those other families, I can see those picture perfect families and say, that's amazing.
Right.
But golly, God chose something for me that not many people choose.
Oh, for sure.
Because I get to feel chosen by these children. Like, we seek each other out. And same for those kids who've had struggles with self-worth their whole life. They see Dean and I, two random adults. We seek them out and pursue them because we love them. And they're just a beautiful picture in that not many people get to experience.
Well, the Lord knew that you and Dean were able to do this and take this job on and do it well.
Before we knew.
Before you knew. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, because it's only because of Him. And He's given you those giftings, though, Mandy. And so I know one of your favorite verses is the Psalms 37:4. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. And you had shared with me this picture of this sailboat that has an anchor that is tied on to a treasure chest. So
it's a little complicated.
Yeah. So if you want to explain what that means.
Yeah. Throughout my journey, and a random fun fact, I was a fine art major. So I was a photographer, I was a painter, did a lot of drawing. Now I do software and math all day, but there's still this creative side to me, and I'm a visual person. And throughout this journey over the years, every time I felt like I was having to give up a desire of my heart, and I had that verse out of context for years, because I'm saying, God, if I find delight in you, you will give me the desires of my heart. And at one point in that healing, when I had a pivot point, this image came to me where I could see all of my desires locked up like it's in a treasure chest. And these are my treasures. This is what I consider the secret to my happiness and my fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
And if God could just grant me these desires, then I will finally feel fulfilled.
Right.
But I saw myself getting so tied to those. I was anchored to those. And the vision of a sailboat being at the surface of the water with this long rope with an anchor hooked to this treasure chest at the bottom of the ocean. I saw myself as that sailboat saying, God, you can do anything you want in my life, and I'll do anything you want of me, as long as you can keep me within the length of this rope that's anchored to that treasure chest. Use me within the vicinity of my desires. Like, work with these parameters.
Right.
I was limiting God
Right.
in what I was allowing him to do in my life. And I felt him continue to say, if you will cut free yourself to those desires and trust where I'm leading you. And this picture shows like wind in the sails. It's God trying to lead me in the direction he has planned for me. But I couldn't get to where he wanted me to go. One, because I couldn't see it. It was beyond my comprehension, what he would ever have planned for my life. And two, I just wasn't willing, because I figured I knew myself better. I know what's going to make myself happy more than God. And the way that verse has been taken out of context for so many years, we get hung up on that second half of God will grant you the desires of your heart. I mean, those desires are different for so many different people, and they are God-honoring, understandable desires. God, cure me from this terminal illness. Cure my loved one from this terminal illness. Lord, bring a spouse to me. I've been single for too long. Don't you know that this will bring me fulfillment if you could bring me a partner, a teammate? Lord, help me get this job so that I can pay my bills and provide for my family. There's simple, understandable things that we keep a white-knuckled grip on, of saying this will bring me satisfaction. This will be the salve to my heart that I'm looking for. But what we take out of context is that we forget that first half. And when it says take delight in the Lord, when you really unpack that, it means to say when you find all of your joy and fulfillment in the Lord. And this cracked me up leading up to this. I was looking for some beautiful artwork of that psalm. You can Google a verse and they'll bring up neat graphics and stuff. But so I just typed in delight yourself in the Lord. But Google AI these days, it'll bring up these summaries. So Google artificial intelligence gave this depiction, this interpretation of it. And I was like, wow, I think Google actually has some theological foundations here. But it says, delight yourself in the Lord means finding joy, pleasure, and satisfaction in God, aligning your desires with his, and experiencing his transformative power in your life. It's also about prioritizing your relationship with God and allowing him to shape your heart and desires. He shapes our heart and desires. This verse found in Psalms doesn't promise a life free from difficulties. Oof, I can feel that. But rather a life filled with God's presence and blessings as you seek him. As you delight in the Lord, your desires will naturally begin to align with his and his desires for your life. And I thought, wow, like that. That was probably the best summary I've ever read. I don't want to give credit to Google, but mercy. It was pretty powerful.
They got it pretty spot on.
Yes.
So you do. I mean, there's so many things in this life that we think we want, and we're so fixated on that particular, goal or whatever it is that we want, so badly, but we're missing the point, God should be enough for all of us to be very content with just him.
When we're resting in the folds of his presence, all the other details fade. Not easily.
Right.
But they can, because we say, God, I completely trust you.
Right. And you get to the point like, your will be done, not mine.
Exactly.
And when you truly, sincerely mean that, that's when he can actually start showing you what he has planned for you.
Absolutely.
Until then, it's hard. We will keep striving to get whatever it is that we think we want that's going to make us happy. But so many times he wants us to just stop and surrender. And yeah.
There's such a stubbornness, though, with our human nature. I mean, I picture like our white knuckles on the steering wheel of our life, just saying, I've got control of it. I know where I'm going. And it's another excerpt from Experiencing God where it says, you can't stay where you are and go with God at the same time.
True.
And I needed to keep my hands close on that treasure chest of all my desires. I had to keep it within my peripheral vision to say, use me, but don't take me too far away from these things.
Wow.
And he's saying, I need you to cut the rope that is tying you down to those things.
Right.
Trust that what's out of your line of sight is far greater than you can ever imagine. It might be harder, but it's going to be far more intimate and fulfilling.
Right. Well, it's pretty amazing how he has. You were a very special woman when he created you, Mandy.
I don't know, special or crazy, one of those.
He's taking you through some really hard seasons, but but the joy of the Lord and what you're doing today and the beauty that he has brought from these relationships that you have built with these children and these parents and these families who are reconciled. And this huge sibling group that, they probably call you mom and dad, and y'all spend a lot of time with each other. And I know a few weeks ago you had gone to the graduation of one of the siblings.
Yeah.
From TJC graduation.
Yep. She's one of our bonus kids. She never even lived with us. She was older. She was out of foster care, but we walked through life with her. I mean, I helped her get her driver's license. She graduated TJC.
Mandy.
She's never been on an airplane, so we took her to Las Vegas and got her on an airplane we do life together, and it is so fun.
Oh, you do. And you don't need adoption papers to say that you are a parent to them.
Yeah.
That. And so anyhow, I just think that's absolutely beautiful. And you have so many different stories.
Well, and I think it continues to affirm their worth for them to realize we have zero obligation, but we do it because we just love you in a way that we can't even comprehend how much we love you. We do it because we want to.
Right. That's great. So were there other verses that you would like to share with the listeners that really has helped you move along with God's plan?
Well, I would say the entire book of James has been soothing and compelling through all of this. Because there's so many painful truths in James as you're wrestling with hard things. And one of the classics that a lot of people know, James 1, verses 2 through 4, is that we consider it pure joy whenever we face trials, because we know that the testing of our faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that we may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And mercy. I don't like that verse. Because it just feels like, we're getting our flaws pounded out of us sometimes. And when we're feeling tested, that's God's way of saying, okay, you're not quite there. And I read in a kind of a devotional on this passage, it says, reaching complete maturity, think of it like a piece of fruit approaching perfect ripeness. And you're not going to eat a banana when it's green and hard and bitter, and you're not going to eat a banana when it's spoiled. God's preparing us for the exact time to do the exact work to serve our exact purpose. And that comes through refining these flaws out of it, refining our humanness out of us through the testing of our faith.
Right. Yes, so you definitely feel mature and complete.
I sense, and I can already foresee many more challenges coming my way. And I often say, and Dean and I have been in the trenches of this conversation I'm like, honey, I can feel God knocking on the lid of my treasure chest. And that's a constant development in our lives, because once we surrender one thing to God,
Right.
our humanness has a way of finding something else that we hold on tight to.
Right.
And God keeps knocking on the lid of that treasure chest saying, I can see a corner of your heart that you have not completely surrendered to me, that you have not given complete trust of your life to me. And every so often he opens that lid and says, okay, let's talk about this right here. Things that we didn't even realize we were holding on tight to until we're being asked to surrender it.
Right. Well, I think you have gotten used to the pattern by now.
Yeah. I said, okay, here we go again.
Here we go again. And so, you had mentioned, Mandy, one of the other verses, which I absolutely love, is the Philippians 2:13. So, for it is God who is producing in you both the desire and the ability to do what pleases him.
Yeah.
And so it's not doing what pleases us. It's doing what pleases him. He builds that desire, and he gives us the ability to fulfill that desire. And it's so true.
Yeah.
So true. Like, if you had asked me, would I be doing podcasting? My kids are like, Mom, you don't even listen to podcasts. I'm like, but you just have a conversation. I love hearing people's stories about what God has done in their lives and how he's challenged them, how he's grown them, how he's pushed them. And, and so, but yeah, I wouldn't have never guessed that I would be doing this. And so it is, but like you said, the work that you're doing doesn't even feel like work,
Doesn't mean that it's easy.
No, it doesn't mean it's
And
easy.
I'm sure it's the same for you, where there are things within your ministry work you say, okay, I'm tired today, but you reach a point where you can't not do it anymore. It's something that you just inherently seek out and continue to pursue. And I think with Philippians 2:13, there's a flip side of that coin too, where he gives us the power and the desire to fulfill his work and his plans. But there have been times where I've begged God for mercy too, where when we faced that pivot point where it was definitive, we're not going to be able to have children biologically, I said, God, then have mercy on me to remove that natural woman's desire to experience pregnancy. And that may seem like an odd prayer, but if I can't do it, then at least not have me be curious about it and have that longing. And he had mercy on me, where, as strange as it may say, I see women who are pregnant. I'm like, yeah, that's not for me.
Right.
But he granted me mercy with that.
No, that is wonderful that you knew to pray for that.
If that's not your plan, then help me not desire it.
Right. For sure. So you had referenced, several times about Henry Blackaby's experiencing God. And so in the show, we will have show notes where people can order that study. I did that many, many years ago, and I probably need to do it again because I'm in a different phase of my life. And so, but were there any other resources, would you say?
Golly, there's so many. I just refer to that one because that has helped me journey through big pivot points.
Okay.
That book and that study really helped me navigate. What sat with me the most profoundly is we say, God, what is your plan for my life? And the core point of that book is to say, instead we say, God, what is your plan? What is your plan for the kingdom? Show me how I fit within that.
Right.
And that was the picture, the emoji with the exploding head. That was the aha moment for me of, okay, I have to seek just God's plan for the kingdom.
Right.
And then figure out what my role is in that.
Right.
And yes, there are many books that have helped me, but that one has been profound.
No, that is very good. So, well, tell the listeners how they can get a hold of you if they want to email you and ask you questions, find out more about Families Count.
Absolutely. The easiest way to reach me these days is through email, because I'm not always able to pick up my phone. But you can email me at gabcfamiliescount@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, Mandy, thank you so much for just coming on the show today. And I just admire how you have yielded to the Lord and allow his plan for your life to flourish and to roll it out. And now you're seeing the fruit of it you're still in the middle of your life, you know what I mean? You've got other things up ahead that I'm sure the Lord's going to open up that treasure chest again and go, okay, what else is in your heart that needs to be, discussed and talked about? But he is a really good God. And it's absolutely amazing how you and Dean have just laid your lives down for a lot of these children and for these families. And, the Lord has given the desires of your heart in so much of a greater way that you would have never, ever imagined.
And we would have robbed ourselves of that if we kept trying to strong will our plans. And the journey has not been pretty. It's not been easy, but gosh, it has been worth it.
Right.
It's been worth it.
Right.
The intimacy of living in the folds of his plan for our life is it's difficult to put into words.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up today's Getting Real to Heal with Dr. Grace, and I will see you the next time. Bye now. Thank you to today's show sponsor, Express Employment Professionals. They are the leading staffing agency in East Texas, and they have helped thousands of businesses and companies find the right employees. If you are somebody that's looking for a job, Express Employment Professionals can also help you. Go to expresspros.com. That is expresspros.com. If you liked what you heard today and you want these Jesus stories to go out into the world, please consider giving to deepintheheartministries.com. You can also get a hold of me at grace@drgraceenglish.com.